Hello everyone, today we're going to be having a quick look back at Tearlaments. Now, this is a deck, of course, completely running and, or according to some people, ruining Master Duel. So it's going to be pretty important that we know what it is, how it works, and if you are interested in playing it, a few ideas as to what you can do. Now, this is a list that we had come up with when we were playing. I'm not saying that this is the best list ever. We do have a few sort of funky, fun additions like the Cyberstein and stuff. But mostly, it's pretty standard, right? This is a pretty standard list, barring one or two cards. What the deck does, of course, for anybody who doesn't play Master Duel but still watches videos, or for anyone who maybe doesn't play at higher ranks, Tearlaments is a deck that focuses around milling out their deck and using their monsters to conduct fusion summons from the graveyard. Pretty simple strategy. There's a lot of moving parts, but ideally the goal of the strategy is rather straightforward. So we're going to be doing a deck profile on this towards the end of the video. We have 3 replays lined up. We have one where we set up a really solid board turn 1. We have one where we get absolutely cooked, showing off some of the best possible counters to Tearlaments. And number 3, we have a really in-depth, rather long game as well, sort of displaying the back and forth. So watch the gameplay. Get an idea for how some of the cards will work. It's easier to see it and then listen to it so you can conceptualize what you're actually listening to. And at the end, we'll go through the deck one card at a time. So if you're interested in these types of breakdowns, of course, you know where the subscribe button is if you haven't already hit it. And there's a like button as well if you do so enjoy what you're watching. And let's get into the gameplay. Alright, getting into our first game here. We don't actually have any Tearlaments in hand, but Foolish Burial Goods is here to fix that. Pitching Select to the graveyard basically lets you grab any of your Tearlaments from your deck. Now we grab Siren here. Typically you might want to grab Rhinoheart, but given that we have a lot of cards in our hand that we would like to pitch to the graveyard, Siren's not a bad option either. So we're going to open up with her pitching the Shadow Beast to the graveyard. Well, and not before we get hit with the maximum C here. So we're going to use Crossout Designator to shut down the max C. Crossout Designator has been an absolute lifesaver in this deck. I would definitely recommend playing it. There are certain hand traps that just really hurt you, and this helps deal with that. Summoning out the Siren, pitching the Beast, milling 3 cards. That triggers the Merly and the Havness in the graveyard. So we've got a few options going on here. Shadow Beast activating as well to draw us an additional card, as well as Agido's effect in hand. Not many people use that effect very often, but here we're able to use it to summon it out of the field alongside our Medora. Shadow Beast, draw 1, drawing into the Rhinoheart, which is phenomenal. Now we're going to shuffle back to summon out Kit Kalos here from the Fusion deck. Shuffling back for the Mud Dragon of the Swamp as well off of Merly. Now Kit Kalos is going to grab us Sulik here from the deck. We're going to normal summon the Rhinoheart. Rhinoheart on summon's going to pitch the Merly to the graveyard. Now that's pretty important. And now I should mention why we didn't use Agido or Kelbeck at the beginning of the turn. The reason being, you don't know if you're playing against Tearlaments or not. This guy's playing a 60 card deck. Whatever he's playing is almost certainly very heavily reliant upon its graveyard. So because you don't really know what your opponent's playing, at the minute, if you look at your hand and have the ability to summon out the Abyss Dweller, before you make any sort of massive graveyard or mill plays or anything like that that might benefit your opponent, summon the Abyss Dweller first. Sometimes you can't, in which case you're just going to have to risk it, but with a hand like that, you can easily summon out the Dweller before you commit to any huge plays, so that's what we decided to do. And now that we have the Dweller on the field, we feel a lot more confident about playing off the graveyard, basically. So we're going to go for the effect of Kit Kalos here, chaining the Abyss Dweller, summoning out Merly to send itself to the graveyard. Merly milling 3, Kit Kalos milling 5. That is 8 total cards being sent from your deck to your graveyard. Now, in this build, this was an earlier build we were playing. We actually had Mass Change in this. It makes no functional difference. Again, we just subbed this out for more hand traps, I'm pretty sure. But it's the same thing, basically. Fusion summoning out Rulkalos now. Now linking off into Sprite Elf, making sure that Sprite Elf points at the Rulkalos, which makes it untargetable, which is a big deal. That's a big deal. Summoning out Diviner of the Herald here. Diviner is able to pitch a level 4 to the graveyard, changing its level to level 6, milling 5 cards from either player's deck before synchro summoning into Baron de Fleur. Now we were able to mill a bunch of cards from our opponent's deck here. That gives us a lot of opportunity to learn, plus he wasn't able to activate anything because of Dweller, so even if he sends the likes of Kelbeck, Agido, Medora, whatever, he can't actually use them thanks to Dweller. We've got Baron de Fleur now on the board, so we got Omni Negate, Monster Negate, Summon Negate, we got Graveyard Negate, we've got Recursion, we've got basically everything, as well as a special summon bounce in our hand. This is incredible. Our opponent's going to mill a whole ton of cards to the graveyard, but because of Dweller, we don't care. We're not going to negate it because he can't use the effects of anything he just pitched to the graveyard, including all of his Tearlament cards. We completely countered him with the Dweller, and there you go. It was simply too much. And there you go. Again, it just shows off not only sort of how good the deck is, but also sort of the built-in counters to not only itself, but other main sort of graveyard-based strategies. And Dweller isn't even the only way in which we could interrupt that. We of course have the likes of Medora and Keldo in our graveyard, which can also shuffle cards back from the grave back into the deck. So yeah, the graveyard is not an option, and between Rolkalos, Sulik, Kelbeck, and Baron de Fleur, there was no way they were going to be able to play anything. Let's get into game 2. Alrighty, getting into game 2 here. Now we open up with the field spell. Now the field spell is amazingly powerful. Grabbing the Rhino-Heart from deck to hand, normal summoning the Rhino-Heart, pitching any of your... you basically pitch any of your Tearlaments from deck to graveyard. It doesn't matter which one, because you're just going to use its effect to shuffle itself back into the deck anyway, and they all have the same effect. Ideally, maybe not Merly. Maybe avoid using Merly, right? Because you might want to use her effect specifically later on. But whatever one you pitch off Rhino-Heart literally doesn't matter. They're going to go Max C here. Luckily, we've got that designator on deck here, so we're going to designate the Max C and negate that. Max C is one of the biggest counters, of course, to Tearlaments because they typically don't play things like Ash. So hitting them with the Max C is usually very detrimental. So that's one big thing to play to beat Tearlaments. We're going to summon out the Kit Kalos. Now Kit Kalos activates to grab ourselves a Tearlament card. Ironically, you can technically play around this, technically, right? By using the field spell to pop your own Kikalos, but you don't know that they have this until after you choose whether or not to activate your field spell. So you can use the field spell to pop your own Kikalos to trigger its mill effect, but then you don't get to use its special summon, basically. Which is, I mean, it's a valid idea if you're afraid of your opponent having infinite impermanence, but again, you don't get the option to like reuse it after you find out or anything. You've sort of committed to it. So he imperms us, negates our Kikalos, and with Tearlaments, if they don't really have an extender, they can't play past you negating their Kikalos, be it imperm, be it Veiler, be it whatever. Kikalos then gets tributed off for a Gamma Seal, and I believe we all know where this is going, Numero Network. Now with the imperm, we should logically be able to survive this. They're going to summon out their monsters. They're going to swing in with the first. We're going to negate it with the infinite impermanence. That means no attack boost and no protection. Swings in with the second one, takes 1200 points of damage. So it's looking like we're going to survive until he drops the limiter removal, boosting his last gate up to 8000 attack points, and GG's. Nothing else really to be said. It's literally, sometimes against Tearlaments, it's as simple as an imperm. Simple as a Veiler. You just stop the Kikalos and they really run out of options very fast. I would have had to have had an extender in hand like Medora or Keldo in order to discard one of the fairies. I would have had to have some way of milling out one of the Agido or Kelbecks. Again, options weren't great. Options were not great for sure, and that's what caused us to lose. Sometimes it's just an imperm. Save your negate for Kikalos and see what happens. Let's get into game 3. Alrighty, now this one is a monster of a game. We're going to bring out our Rhino-Heart, starting off strong, but getting hit with the Ash Blossom. That's normally pretty much not good. We do have Tearlament Crime, right? So we're not totally out of the game just yet. The reason that this is keeping us in the game, not only one, is it a counter trap, which means it can be, it basically can't be negated or responded to except by another counter trap. It also then sends a Tearlament monster from your hand to the graveyard. A monster from your hand to the graveyard, so we're able to pitch the likes of Havness to get fusion summoning and get our plays going during our opponent's turn. So it's not just one negate, it's a negate that's going to allow us to continue our engine. Now they're going to start off of Lantern Shark. Now if anyone knows how sharks work, their monsters will basically extend off of one another nearly infinitely. So this guy is basically going to get the special summon 1 and have any number of extenders in his hand that can special summon themselves so long as you control water monsters. So to prevent that from even being a threat or a problem or an issue, we are simply going to negate it and shuffle it back. Because we knew our opponent wouldn't have any serious plays after that, we decided to keep the Havness in case he did have a monster he was going to use as an extender and instead drop the Keldo. So we're going to normal the Havness, we're going to swing and swing, nothing too exciting just yet. Going to set the Imperm face down and end our turn. Like I said, this is going to be a bit of a slower one, because Tearlaments, unless you have like an engine card to get you started, are going to be rather slow. True, we could have used Crime for that, but we sort of betted on our opponent having an extender that they just ended up not having. Now they do though. The Buzzsaw Shark, we're going to hit that Buzzsaw Shark with an Infinite Impermanence, just shutting it down. Again, we're just waiting on our opponent having a big play, a big extender before we go balls deep on it, right? We need to make sure that they've got actually something worth negating. They do now in the form of the Dweller. Dweller's going to be a real problem here, taking out the Reinhardt, and now passing back to us. So the Dweller, of course, is an issue, getting boosted by the fact that it has water monsters as material, detaching one at the beginning of our turn to prevent us from using our graveyard, terraforming, grabbing us the field spell. This is going to grant all of our monsters a 500 point attack boost, grabbing ourselves a Reinhardt from the deck as well. Reinhardt now activating. He's going to get hit with the droplet though. Our opponent really does not want us to resolve the Reinhardt, which makes total sense. But based off the fact that they've eaten up so many of their resources just to stop us this much, as well as a droplet, we're sort of confident that our opponent's not going to be able to just snap their fingers and finish us off. And they're going to activate the White Mirror here. We're going to use our Keldo and shuffle a few cards back into the deck, basically, including the monster he was going to revive. That's going to prevent him from, again, getting any real plays off. That's the whole goal here. We want to prevent our opponent from getting plays off while we're still building up our resources. This is a bit of a slow one. Sometimes Tearlaments will trap you into these kinds of matchups where you just lack the ability to snap your fingers and start a play. We do have a Havness still. We're going to take out the Abyss Dweller. Now that it no longer has its water materials, its attack boost vanishes, so Reinhardt is bigger. Wiping it out, going into our opponent's turn here. They're going to set a card face down and pass. Having the 2k attack on the Reinhardt isn't actually even that bad. Our opponent's going to go max C here at the very beginning of our turn. We decide to hold on to the Crossout Designator. No point in committing to a play that doesn't need to happen. And we're going to pass turn again. We're in control of the game. We're not in any immediate rush to get anything done. We of course have DD Crow and Designator, so it's not as if we're in any way too badly off. We're going to banish the Shark as it tries to revive itself. Again, just keeping our opponent down, removing their resources, removing their recursion. That's what a control deck does. That's the whole point. They're going to shuffle the Abyss Dweller back into the deck and then end their turn. They also must be confident that we can finish them off, and they would be 100% correct in this situation. We're going to swing in with the Reinhardt. We keep the Havness in hand because its effect in hand is going to be more useful than just the additional damage. All we need our opponent to do is actually summon a monster and activate an effect on field. That's when we can trigger the Havness and we can start to play the game, but they just aren't doing that. They're going to go number 101 Silent Honor Arc, swinging in, wiping out the Reinhardt. Main phase 2 then, end phase, not doing anything else, not activating effects. Again, so long as they don't activate effects, the Havness sort of doesn't do an awful lot. Again, we're not going to summon it. We're not afraid of an OTK. We're just going to wait and see what our opponent does. They're going to summon out the Buzzsaw Shark. Now finally activating a monster effect on field so we can use our Havness. Thank the Lord, it is happening. We mill a bunch of cards here, including a Kelbeck. Kelbeck sending the top 5 from both players' decks to the graveyard, followed by an Agito doing the same thing. Sulik searching our deck for a monster, while Kelbeck in our hand is going to bounce that Silent Honor Arc back to our opponent's deck. Get that out of here. Sulik then grabbing us a Merly for some follow-up, as well as Agito pulling another 5 cards. Shadow Beast drawing 1. The Scream is going to search our deck for a Tearlament trap card and add it to our hand. So we're going to grab the the Crime actually. Nice Shut All Beast is going to grab us Cult by the Grave, and Fairy Tale Snow is going to summon itself out, banishing 7, summoning itself to flip one of his monsters face down. That means no Exceed summoning for you. He is, however, going to be able to try and use that Leaf Shark in the grave. Absolutely, or the Crystal Shark, sorry. No bueno. Mudora, shuffle it all back into the deck, and this is what I'm talking about. As soon as your opponent makes a play, you can make a play, and you sort of feed off of your opponent's ability to play the game. They summon out Bahamut. We're just going to negate that. We don't really need to be dealing with Bahamut right now. Summoning out extra Exceed monsters, absolutely not good, sir. He does still have the ability, he doesn't have the ability to attack because he still technically activated the effect. And yeah, we're in a really solid position. Mudora comes out, now we're going to Exceed into Time Thief Redoer. Redoer then is going to basically banish itself to the end of the turn. Going to set 2 into the battle phase, wiping out his face down monster, and then we will end phase. I feel like I misinterpreted. Yeah, So there was something there I had inherently misinterpreted about the effect. I got that play slightly wrong. Bahamut Shark trying to activate its effect again. That's why we have the Tearlaments Crown, shuffling it back into the deck and negating its effect. We do, of course, get to pitch a monster to the graveyard, that being the Merly. Merly now will get Fusion Summoning by shuffling back into the deck the 2 materials needed for the Tearlaments Kit Kalos. Kit Kalos now is going to grab a Scream for the deck, considering there's not an awful lot more we need. There's the Buzzsaw Shark, bringing out the Lantern Shark. This guy is absolutely determined to try and make this work, going into Nash Knight before ranking it up, stealing our Redoer to go into the Sea Exceed Nash Knight. Nash Knight, of course, being rather problematic, detaching a material to rank itself up into the number C101 Silent Honor Dark, stealing our Kit Kalos. He just yoinked half of our field, wiping out the Havness. Now suddenly this isn't looking so hot for us. We are in a bit of a predicament right now. We do have the Scream in hand, which is going to be useful, and we top deck into a Merly, which is awesome. That means summoning Merly is going to trigger off Scream and her own effect to mill a total of 6 cards, which is great. That's exactly what we need to be seeing. Dropping as many cards to our graveyard as we possibly can, reducing the Silent Honor Dark by 500 attack points. Sprite Elf now summoning out, bringing back the Diviner of the Herald. Fairy Tale Snow triggering in the graveyard, banishing 7 cards to flip the Honor Dark face down. 1500 defense is a lot easier to deal with, taking it out with the Snow, but if anyone knows this guy's effect, he's not done just yet. He will come back to the field after being destroyed, so long as he had Exceed material at the time. But now that he doesn't have Exceed material, he is significantly more vulnerable. Going into IP Masquerena, then banishing another 7 cards to use Fairy Tale Snow yet again, flipping it face down once more, as well as keeping a material on our board so that we can at some point use our IP Masquerena. Now Sprite Elf, before anything else, is going to summon out the Merly Mill 3. Now Siren now is going to activate its effect, Fusion summoning out for Kit Kalos. We still have Kit Kalos in our graveyard. Now we get the pop of the card on his field thanks to our field spell. Beautiful Princess, activate its effect. We're going to activate Kit Kalos, and that will completely shut down our opponent's turn. So there you go. Pretty much straightforward. Going into turn 19. Turn 19. And we finally get to go for lethal. 35, 1850, and lastly 1400. Hell of a game. They performed phenomenally. Playing a Shark deck, again, I was playing top tier Tearlaments, right? Of course, we didn't play everything perfectly, but come on. He was playing Sharks. And he did really well. That was a phenomenal display from our opponent. I'm more happy with his gameplay than I am with mine, to be perfectly honest with you, because I was using a top deck, he wasn't, and he put up a magnificent fight. So very, very well done to our opponent there. Sharks are pretty good. I'm not gonna lie, Sharks are pretty decent. They don't really have a fantastic end game, but I mean the potential is there. You know, they lost Toad, which kind of sucks, but you know the potential is definitely there. But either way, let's get into the deck profile. Alrighty, getting into the deck profile. So the deck is pretty straightforward, honestly. You saw most of the plays. I know that in the gameplays there was like a card here and a card there that maybe we were or weren't playing here, but this is pretty much identical to the list that we were playing in the games, and yeah, it sort of works along the same veins no matter what. So we're going to go through the list one card at a time. So I'm going to remove the hand traps first of all, just so we have a full idea of the core sort of cards that we're playing with. We've got Double DD Crew, phenomenal card against Tearlaments. We got Double Maxi, because Maxi's disgusting, of course, and less people playing Ash because of Maxi means this card is going to resolve more often than ever, which is potentially a good thing, maybe a bad thing. We've got Triple Infinite Impermanence because it's amazing right now. We've got Double Call by the Grave and a single Cross Out Designated. This card has been a lifesaver, absolutely. And everything else here you could argue is somewhat core. Of course, Cyberstein isn't, but we'll talk about it. So Cyberstein, first of all, level 2, which is the main reason it's here. It being a level 2 means that it can be used both as material for the summon of and resummoned by Sprite Elf, which is its main sort of piece of synergy. So it being a level 2, basically you pay 5,000 life points, special summon a fusion monster from your extra deck. Now, that is not only good generically to summon out a really powerful generic fusion monster like Exterio for infinite negates, as well as milling, it also can summon Kit Kalos. Kit Kalos does not have a fusion summon clause on its effect, so you can summon Kit Kalos off of Cyberstein, which makes this card technically a 1-card starter. It's like the replacement to Instant Fusion. Now, paying 5,000 life points is a little bit of a hefty cost, especially considering the card is technically vulnerable to Imperm and Veiler and cards like that. But being able to instantly summon out either a Kikalos if you don't have any starters, or an Exterio if you've already played the game, especially considering you can do your full combo if you happen to mill this card, you can resummon it off of Sprite Elf, and then activate its effect for an extra huge boss monster. So Cyberstein, definitely, I think, a really solid card in this deck. So for sure, playing it. We've got Devaner of the Herald. This card is here as, again, similar situation, recursion, and because of its level. It can be used as material as or resummoned by Sprite Elf. This one is a tuner that opens up options for synchro plays, primarily Baron de Fleur. So this card can send a fairy monster from your deck to the graveyard, and then it modulates its level by the level of the monster that you sent. So if you send a level 4 fairy, like a Kelbeck or an Agido, then you will boost its level by 4. Now that is really good, because of course you want a bunch of these fairies in the graveyard, trigger off their effects and such, so that is awesome. It's a tuner that changes itself to level 6, meaning that alongside any of your level 4s, it can bring out Baron de Fleur as a generic negate. Which is awesome, considering yet again, you can either normal summon it and then send one of your fairies to the graveyard to start off all your plays, so it is a starter, not a guaranteed starter, but it can start your combos. Or you can recur it later on after your combo to go into the likes of Baron de Fleur. Phenomenal. So really good versatility. I like having these cards in here because they just open the doors to a bunch of different options, and neither of them are bricks because they're both technically starters, right? So that's why I'm playing them. We've got, so in terms of the Tearlaments cards, we're playing literally just as many of them as you possibly can. As many of them as you can. Double Merle, double Havness, double Siren, 3 Rhino Hearts. Now, all three of these ones, all of the ones that are limited to 2, Merle, Havness, Siren, all have a second effect that is identical. Whenever any of these cards are sent from the deck, or sorry, just sent to the graveyard by a card effect, not as cost, or by battle or anything else, if they're sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can fusion summon by shuffling the card that was sent, of course itself, and any other monster from your graveyard, hand, or field back into the deck. So they all let you fusion summon. The idea is you want to mill these cards to the graveyard through their own effects, which all mill, which I'll talk about in a second, or through the effects of the likes of Kelbeck, Agido, things like that. They all have a primary effect as well that is unique. Merle, on summon, will mill 3 cards. Pretty straightforward. You're going to use this card a lot, especially in combination with both the effects of Kikalos and Sprite Elf. And we'll talk about that when we get to these cards in particular. But yeah, on summon, mill 3. Havness, whenever your opponent activates the effect of a monster on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand and then mill 3 cards. Pretty straightforward. Again, you saw this card during the Shark gameplay. So yeah, pretty solid. And Siren, this one's a little bit more versatile. You can discard any other monster from your hand to special summon this card, and then send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. And the sending of the monster from hand to graveyard is sent by effect and not cost, which is an important distinction. So that if you send a Tearlaments monster or a Shizu card to the graveyard off of this card's discard, or its milling, of course, that will trigger their effects. So they all have effects that will either summon themselves, or on summon they get to mill a bunch of cards, which is just going to help the consistency of your deck a lot. That's why you want as many different names as you can possibly get, so you can mill these cards more consistently. We've got the one of King of the Swamp. It is an aqua monster. Its name it can be used as basically a fusion substitute for any particular monster, meaning if they somehow get rid of your Kikalos, or maybe you just haven't summoned it yet, you can go into the likes of Rilkalos or your Kaleido Heart before actually having these specific monsters that they need, which is pretty cool. And that's really its only use. Now we've got, it can also technically it can also discard itself to add polymerization from your deck to your hand, which is the only reason this card is here. So it can discard itself for poly as well, and then its effect obviously can be used as fusion material from the graveyard. So pretty solid card overall. Fairy Tail Snow, really powerful card. Again, generic recursion, flipping cards face down, preventing link summoning, exceed summoning, as well as just being able to be used as link climb fodder or level 4 material for some of your exceeds. just a really good generic card. There's no reason not to play it. Now we've got Rhinoheart, the primary starter of Tearlaments. So this card, when summoned, you'll send a Tearlament monster from your deck to the graveyard. Now, of course, that is the entire point of the deck. Usually you're going to be sending one of your Tearlaments so that you can fuse it with your Rhinoheart on the field to go into your Kikalos. So this card basically starts the whole combo, because the combo begins with Kikalos, right? Everything that leads up to the summoning of this card is irrelevant. If this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect similar to the other guys, he is an effect when sent to the grave by effect, but it's not the fusion effect. Instead, you can special summon it, but if you do, you have to send a Tearlament card from your hand to the graveyard. And again, it's being sent by effect, so it'll trigger whatever card you send. So it recurs itself instead of fusion summoning, but yeah, it's primarily here as your main starter. If you want to make this card more consistent, which you might want to do, of course, you might want to start running something like Rhoda, which is solid, or Foolish Burial. Both of these are really, really solid cards. I didn't want to clutter the deck too much, so we didn't include them, but those are both options. Then we've got the Ishizu cards. Again, we're playing pretty much as many of them as we can, minus one Mudora. We were playing 3 of this, but we ended up dropping it to 2. But I took out the glossy one, how dare I? But we've got the Keldo and the Mudora, both of which are able to discard another Earth Fairy to special summon themselves from the hand. Keldo, if you were to do so, can also grab you another Ishizu card. Mudora would activate Gravekeeper's Trap from your deck if we were playing it, but we're not. So these two basically special summon themselves by ditching another Ishizu card. They can also banish themselves from your field or graveyard to target up to 3 cards in either player's graveyard, return them back to the deck as a quick effect. Of course, everyone's very familiar with these effects. These guys are running rampant on the ranked ladder, but they are very, very powerful. Then we've got Kelbeck and Agido. Again, these two are a bit of a pair. Whenever either of these cards are sent from the hand or deck to the graveyard, you get to mill the top 5 cards of both players' decks. They also both have an effect in hand. With Agido, if a card is sent from the hand or deck to your opponent's graveyard, you get to special summon this card out to the field and revive any level 4 Earth Fairy from your graveyard, which gives you decent access to your Exceed plays. And Kelbeck, whenever the same thing happens, sent a card from your hand, from the hand or deck to your opponent's graveyard, will special summon itself, and it will also bounce back from your opponent's field to their hand one of their special summoned monsters. So Kelbeck is removal, and Agido is revival. Both of which are very, very solid, especially Kelbeck. Absolutely, really, really good card. We've got Shadow Beast. Whenever this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you get to draw 1 card. It is here so that we can fusion summon into the powerful El Shaddoll Winda. All this card needs is any Shaddoll monster and a Dark monster, which most of your Tearlaments are, so you're able to very easily go into Winda as a fallback option. Then you've got Polymerization, of course, here to be searched off of King of the Swamp. Terraforming, because your field spell is limited to 1 and also really ridiculously powerful, so you want to have your field spell as much as you can. Terraforming is another way of getting it. We've got Foolish Burial Goods. A lot of your Tearlament cards, spells and traps included, have effects when sent to the graveyard, so being able to pitch these guys to the grave to get those effects is beneficial. Then you've got the Field Spell. Now this card really sort of brings the deck to a whole new level of power, especially if you're in a situation where you're going second, or maybe it's turn 3 and you want to go for game, whatever it is. This card is incredible. Whenever it's activated, of course, you get to grab a Tearlament monster from your deck to your hand, so automatically a good card, right? It doesn't matter what else this card says, that makes it good enough to play, for sure. Then, any of your fusion monsters or your Tearlament monsters gain 500 attack points. Pretty decent. Some of them are a bit small, so that makes up for it. If a Tearlament monster you control or is in your graveyard is shuffled back into your deck or the extra deck, target a card on the field and destroy it. So it's a quick play. It is essentially a quick play pop, because remember, you're going to be using the effects of the likes of Havness and Merly during your opponent's turn to mill. If you mill a Tearlament monster, you shuffle back to fusion summon, so not only do you get a powerful fusion monster, you also get to pop an extra card. Really, really good. Honestly, it goes without saying, you must play this. If this card ever gets brought to more than 1, you're playing more than 1 of it. Which I doubt will happen for a long time. we've got Tearlament Scream. If this card is face up, and if your opponent, or sorry, if anybody normal or special summons a monster, so long as you control a Tearlaments monster, you get to mill the top 3 cards of your deck, and if you do, all of your opponent's monsters lose 500 attack points until the end of the turn. If this card is sent from the field, so this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can grab any Tearlament trap card and add it directly to the hand. So mills a bunch of cards, reduces their attack points, and also searches you trap cards if it's ever sent to the grave. So this card, so between this and the field spell, you're basically boosting all of your monsters by 1000 attack, which is pretty big, right? As soon as you're talking about that much of a difference, suddenly it becomes very difficult for them to get over the likes of your monsters. Alrighty, then we've got Tearlaments Crime. Tearlaments Crime is a counter trap. Basically, just whenever your opponent activates something, you get while you control the Tearlament monster, you ditch a monster from your hand to the graveyard, negate the effect, and shuffle it back into the deck. If it's sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can target a banished Tearlament monster and add it back to your hand. So this card, it's almost mandatory because it recycles a banished Kit Kalos, right? Your opponent is always going to try and banish Kit Kalos because this is the main card of the deck. So if that ever happens, Tearlaments Crime is a decent way of recycling it back. But also the negate and the pitching and all of that, super good as well. Searchable off of screen. Then we've got Tearlaments Sullick. Sullick, basically a continuous trap. Once per turn, you can target an effect monster your opponent controls. Its effects are negated, and then you ditch a monster you control to the graveyard, and that is permanently negated. So this card, whatever monster you target and negate, will stay negated. It is done. It is finished. Finito. It will not be able to use its effects. So that, being able to use this every single turn, very, very powerful. Getting into the extra deck then, we have the Mud Dragon. Mud Dragon's just a general sort of fusion monster. Sometimes you want a generic one if you chain multiple Tearlaments. It's a decent thing to bring out. It brings with it some built-in protection for anything that matches its attribute, and once per turn it can change its attribute. Pretty handy. We've got El Shaddoll Winda. So long as this card is face up, each player can only special summon once per turn. So if you can bring this card out towards the end of your turn, you can really shut your opponent down, or even summon it during your opponent's turn. Tearlaments Kit Kalos, sorry, I should also mention, can't be destroyed by card effects, which is pretty good. Tearlaments Kit Kalos. This is the central card of the entire deck. Tearlaments Kit Kalos, basically on summon, you can, and note that it says if this card is special summoned, not fusion summoned, it says special summoned, meaning it will still work off of the likes of, well, what was formerly instant fusion, but what is now Cyberstein or revival effects. So if this card is special summoned, grab a Tearlament card from your deck and either add it to your hand or send it to the graveyard, whichever is more suitable for the situation, although typically it'll be your hand. Once per turn, you can target a monster you control, send it to the graveyard, and special summon a Tearlament monster from your hand or graveyard. And then that's basically one of the main effects. Ideally, what you want to do with this card is you want to search your deck for the likes of Tearlament Merly. And Merly in particular is useful because its mill is on summon. So usually its search effect, Kit Kalos' search effect, you'll grab a Merly. You'll activate the second effect, you'll send Kit Kalos to the graveyard to summon your Merly. Now why would you do that? Well, when this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, including its own, you get to mill 5 cards. That means you grab the Merly, send the Kit Kalos to summon the Merly. Merly mills 3 on summon, Kit Kalos mills 5 on being sent to the grave. So because of that, you get to mill 8 cards, and you now have Kit Kalos in your graveyard ready to be used as fusion material, and you also have Merly on your field ready to be used as link material for the Sprite Elf, which will allow you to recur the Merly during your opponent's turn to mill more cards to get more fusion summons. And during your turn, not only can a Fervor revive the Merly, again if you need more material, it can also revive the likes of the Diviner of the Herald and Cyberstein, one of which at least is going to be in your graveyard from the fact that you just milled at least 8 cards, right? Probably more than that before you've even gotten to that point, but you milled at least 8. And the likelihood of you hitting another, Kelbeck or Nagito to mill an additional 5, one of these two, at least one of the two, is going to be in your graveyard. So you're going to get to go into either something like your Exterio or your Baron de Fleur. Guaranteed. So that's Kit Kalos. Again, it's just a huge powerful starter. We got Dragostapelia, generic fusion, shuffle back a fusion monster and a dark monster to bring this guy out. It's a decent way to recycle some of your fusions as well, like your Rilkalos, your Kaleido Heart. Shuffle these guys back to get fusion summoning into Stapelia. It means you can go back into these guys later. Rilkalos, this card needs Kit Kalos as material, which is why you want to be using its effect to get this into the graveyard, because you're shuffling it back anyway, as fusion material. Other Aqua monsters you control cannot be destroyed by battle. You can use each of its following effects once per turn. If your opponent activates an effect that would special summon a monster, negate the activation, then send one of your monsters in the field to the graveyard. If this card's sent to the graveyard by a card effect, either its own or maybe the likes of Sulik or Crime or whatever it is, you then get to re-summon it once. But it's if this fusion summoned card, right? So after you do it the first time, the next time it's sent to the graveyard, because it wasn't fusion summoned, it no longer gets to revive itself. So it gets one free revive. But again, still 3k attack is huge, especially considering you're boosting it by 500 and reducing the M by 500. So it's basically 4k. It protects anything else from being destroyed by battle. Because of Sprite Elf, you will have Sprite Elf in your field. Because of that, Rilkalos will be untargetable, and it's going to negate for a summon effect. Pretty damn powerful. Up next, we have the last of the Tearlament fusion monsters, Kaleido Heart. And now Kaleido Heart's a bit more of your aggressive boss monster. On summon, basically, if he's special summoned or if an Aqua monster is sent from your sent to your graveyard by a card effect, butchered that. It's basically on summon, or if one of your Aquas are sent to the grave by a card effect, yours or your opponent's, this card will shuffle the card your opponent controls back into the deck. Fairly straightforward. If this card itself is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can special summon this card and then send a Tearlament card from your deck to the grave. Now this doesn't have the same restriction that Rilkalos does, in that it doesn't have to be this fusion summoned card. It's just this card, which means it can continuously revive itself over and over, and every time it does, you get to mill an additional Tearlament card, which is amazing, right? It's a million times better than Rilkalos's recursion effect, but at the same time, Rilkalos also has that built-in negate, so it's just a bit of a different situation. Plus, they take different materials. This card needs to have Rhino Heart in particular, plus 2 other Aqua monsters, so it's a little bit more demanding in terms of summoning it, but not by a noticeable amount. Then we've got Exterio, here to be used as a basically a fusion monster off of Cyberstein. So Cyberstein will basically either summon your Kikalos or it will summon your Exterio. Of course, not bound by the same restrictions. This card can it can basically summon out a couple of the biggest boss monsters. It can also summon out Dragostapelia, technically, which is decent. It can summon out Rilkalos as far as I'm aware. But yeah, Exterio is just another really powerful option outside of the ones you can already summon, because it's so good, right? Basically an infinite number of times, if your opponent activates a spell or a trap card, banish a card in your graveyard, send the top card of your deck to the graveyard, then negate the activation and destroy it. It's not limited in any way to once per turn or once per chain or whatever. You just infinitely negate spells and trap cards. You just turn them off. They're no longer accessible. The only exception to that is like Dark Ruler No More or Forbidden Droplet, right? Because they can't be responded to, or counter traps, right? But outside of those, like, they can't use spells and traps. It's a huge detriment. And then considering you've already got the likes of Rilkalos, Baron, Dragostapelia, whatever that's limiting their usage of monsters, what more do you want? We got Baron de Fleur as a level 10 synchro, basically. Diviner of the Herald being able to pitch one of your fairies to become a level 6 makes summoning a level 10 synchro super duper easy, and Baron de Fleur itself is amazingly powerful, having a once per face up Omni Negate as well as once per turn, being able to destroy a card your opponent controls, which is awesome. It can also revive any monster in your graveyard during the standby phase by shuffling itself back, so long as it's level 9 or lower. And that is actually relevant because a lot of these monsters can simply be revived. So once your Baron has used its negate up, you can tag it out to go back into one of your fusion monsters, and then simply summon Baron again later by reviving your Diviner of the Herald. So there's plenty of options with Baron. We've got our Exceed monsters. We've got Dweller, shuts down the graveyard, 2 level 4s, pretty straightforward, really good in the tier mirror match. You've got Baguska, shuts down all face-up monsters on the field. Again, just a really good card, especially if you've got a bit of a slow hand and maybe you're struggling to put up a significant board. Baguska can buy you a little bit of time. And then you've got Tame Thief Redoer. Tame Thief Redoer is a bit of an interesting one. It's interesting because it detaches its materials as part of its effect, right? So if you were to summon this using the likes of your Rhinoheart and your Siren, you can then detach them as part of its effect to trigger off their effects. So he himself will banish it, will, you know, do these. And then its materials, when you detach them, potentially fusion summon, revive, whatever it is. Now what does he actually do? During the standby phase, you're going to yoink the top card of your opponent's deck and add it to this card's material. Then you can activate his effect to conduct as many of these effects as is appropriate based upon his materials. If you detach a monster, banish him until the end phase. If you detach a spell, you draw a card. If you detach a trap, you target a face-up card your opponent controls, place one face-up card your opponent controls on top of the deck. So you basically bounce one back to the top of the deck. It's not very often you'll get the trap effect. It's mostly the monster effect you'll be using, but occasionally you get that little +1 off of a spell card. So yeah, generally he's just here to proc your Tearlaments during your opponent's turn. That's pretty much it. Then IEP Masquerena, just generic Link monster, can summon out a Link monster during your opponent's turn. Works well with Sprite Elf, which is the main Link monster. But yeah, quick Link during your opponent's turn. Whatever monster you summon cannot be destroyed by card effects. We've got 2 big Link boss monsters that we would use with this deck. So yeah, being able to summon them on your opponent's turn is awesome. Sprite Elf. We keep referring to this card, and it makes a lot of these lower level monsters super viable. Sprite Elf basically can be summoned using any 2 monsters as long as one of them is a level, rank, or link 2. Your opponent can't target anything that it points to with card effects, which is huge, right? That means you can protect some of your huge fusion monsters like a Rolkalos and Exterio or whatever using Sprite Elf's arrows. Once per turn as a quick effect, so that means either player's turn, you can also revive any level or rank 2 monster in your graveyard, or link 2, and special summon it to your field, which is amazing. Being able to use Cyberstein or Diviner of the Herald on your turn, or during your opponent's turn, bringing back the likes of Merly, or even IP Masquerena sometimes, to mill a bunch of cards or get link summoning is phenomenal. So this card becomes absolutely mandatory. I'm tempted to play it at 2. It's that good. Neighbor Unicorn. On summon, shuffle a card in your opponent's field back into their deck. Pretty straightforward card to use off of Masquerena during your opponent's turn. And lastly, we've got the White Lady Jumpscare, Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. Link summon this using at least 1 monster your opponent controls. Once per turn, it can negate the effect of a monster that would activate into graveyard, or is it activate or revive from the graveyard? Special summons from the graveyard. So if they try to revive anything from the grave, this card can negate it. On summon, it negates the effects of all face-up monsters your opponent currently controls, so it's a Dark Ruler no more on summon. And yeah, it also won't be destructible by card effects if you use Masquerena to summon it. So yeah, you kaiju one of their monsters, stop them from reviving stuff, and it is Dark Ruler no more on summon. What more do you want? And that's the full deck. So the deck's pretty interesting. It's decently fun to play. I do enjoy playing it. I think the graveyard play, again, it definitely needs limited in some capacity, so it does for sure. The hits to Instant Fusion and King of the Swamp of course hurt it a little bit, but they're not going to break its back. Foolish Burial Goods as well going down. Like those limits, they're not exactly super great for the deck, but they're not gonna hurt it. Its deck's gonna be as powerful as it's ever been. So again, if you guys have any sort of ideas as to what you would change, what you would limit, what you would do about this deck to bring it within sort of the power line, the power level of the meta, in line with all of the other decks, leave your suggestions down below. We don't want to murder the deck, right? We don't want to like, oh, just ban everything and then like leave one Rhino Heart. No. We definitely need to do something about it, but we need to make sure that we don't completely murk the deck, right? Because that's what they did in the TCG. Although in OCG it's still doing well, even with those same bans. So who knows, maybe we do need to completely kill it. Anyway, you leave your thoughts down below. If you haven't subscribed and you got this far, subscribe, like the video, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.